folks. It's Zach Elliott at Feel Free to Argue. This is my second attempt at trying to get through this video. I went a little bit too long in the first one. I'm going to try to get through things a little bit more quickly in this one. I want to talk about a book that I just listened to on tape. It's by a guy called Jared Diamond. He actually won the Pulitzer Prize for this one, called Guns, Germs, and Steel. There's a picture of it, the way it looks on my book on tape. Probably the book looks fairly similar. But the whole book is basically about why is it that Eurasians came to dominate the world, and has some very interesting ideas about how this came to be. And he isolated 4 factors that he talks about in the conclusions of the book. The first one has to do with continental differences in the starting plants and animals available for domestication. What he points out is that most of the animals, the big mammals that have been successfully domesticated were all located in a particular area of the world, which he calls Eurasia, which has Europe, Asia, parts of the Middle East and Northern Africa. Basically this large contiguous landmass. As he points out, this was all, well, no, I'm going to get ahead of myself if I talk about that. But the important part is this is like a large kind of roughly homogeneous, roughly contiguous area. And one of the things he points out is that, generally speaking, man, wherever he was, domesticated the plants and animals that were useful to domesticate. It's not like there were some stupid branch of people somewhere who were, you know, right next to an animal or a plant that was perfectly good for domestication and didn't do it. Basically, any point where you have people who are near something that is useful to domesticate, they do so. And you're actually talking about a fairly small pool of stuff. He says, like, you know, there are literally millions of plant species, you know, probably hundreds of thousands of animal species. But once you carve out all the ones that are, you know, either temperamentally or nutritionally not useful to us, or are too hard to get like a limited amount of nutrition from, you're actually left with a very small pool of stuff that's pretty much universally useful. And generally speaking, whenever any of these universally useful things are around, people got around to domesticating it. So a lot of it has to do with what's around you. This will become a theme. Also, he talks about the rates of diffusion across continents. This contiguous landmass of Eurasia has a huge advantage over other areas. If you think about like it in terms of what are the things that determine whether a crop or a particular animal is going to be successful in one place like it was successful in another place? Well, generally speaking, whether or not that place has the same environment or not. It can tolerate some minor differences in environment, but it has to be roughly the same environment. Well, the nice thing about that huge strip, as you look at it, it's all latitudinally within a certain band. It's a big, long, latitudinal band where you can move crops and animals and have a roughly similar climate, so that it makes it easy, as he calls it, packages of various materials, various domesticated plants, to move quickly across this area. Much more easily, for example, than it would be for something in northern Africa, part of his definition of Eurasia, to move either through the Sahara or through the tropics to get to the southern horn of Africa, to sub-Saharan Africa. So it's very difficult for things to move through these areas, much in the same way that you know, there are the same difficulties in the not in the United States, in the Americas, where you have this tiny strip of the Isthmus of Panama that separates North and South. It makes them, even though people traverse that, and that's how you got people down in South America, still it's not something that's easy to get through, and it's a strip, once again, of things that where temperate species are not going to do well when you're in the more tropical areas close to the equator. Now he's also talking about how some continents are much more isolated than other continents. Perfect example of this is like Australia, where you have all these little islands that are separating Australia from Eurasia. So you have a very low, very slow rate of diffusion of various foodstuffs, various technologies, techniques, etc., from excuse me, from Eurasia to Australia. Australia is actually your most isolated continent, but even the Americas are treated for his purposes as largely a lot of separate little groups, because it was hard to get around in the Americas. You have the Isthmus of Panama, you have the Mexican desert, you have several significant mountain ranges, all of which make it difficult for things to get around. So even though it's a fairly large landmass, probably second in size, it's like a lot more compartmentalized. Not as much, innovations move very slowly around the Americas, as opposed, relative at least, to the way that they developed in Eurasia. And finally, you have continental differences in size and population size. So you have, once again, this large section of Eurasia, and then you have smaller sections, sub-Saharan Africa, the compartmentalized Americas, Australia. These are all isolated. It was harder to get advances and technological advances to them. Crops didn't do as well in these other areas. So what does this tell us, basically? Well, there wasn't anything stupid about Native Americans. If they would have been the ones in Europe instead of people who look like me, then they would have been the oppressors. They would have been the ones who came over here and kicked the shit out of people looking like me who were living here, who would have been the Native Americans in that situation. What he points out is basically that it's mostly a matter of dumb luck, where you were born. And this is like kind of a general principle that I believe in generally. But even besides it as a general principle, I mean, it's probably the biggest function of history. Just has to do with where you were. And I know that, especially in this country, we tend to think of these advantages as being morally sanctioned. In other words, United States is #1 in the world because we're morally superior, because we're smarter than other people, because we are better than other people. And this book really basically puts the lie to all of that. That there is no triumphalism, there is no superior race, there is no superiority at all. All it has to do with is where you were born, and those basically define the kind of advantages and disadvantages that you have to deal with. And that's all there is to it. So any kind of notions that we have of moral or intellectual superiority, they're just garbage. They have nothing to do with the way that history is actually panned out. The lesson of history over and over and over and over again apparently is that it's best to be born in a place that has lots of resources and people who know how to use them, and just to be born in a place with a lot of resources, because people develop the facility for exploiting whatever resources that they have around them. So best to be born in a place that has a lot of resources. So anyway, I've been thinking about this book a lot just because it dovetails with a lot of other thinking that I've been doing. But, I've been trying to put this all neatly together. Maybe you have some problems with it. And if you do, of course, you can feel free to argue. This is Zach Elliott. Hope you're having a good day, everyone.